They were built for hell. Pressure tested for 92 atmospheres. Heat shielded for 500 degrees Celsius. They carried sensors wrapped in titanium, lenses sealed under industrial diamond, and circuits cooled by liquid nitrogen baths, designed to last just long enough to send a single photograph back to Earth. They were the most over-engineered machines humanity had ever sent into space. Both of them were dead in under 3 hours. And the engineers who built them, the men who watched their telemetry flatline from a control room outside Moscow, spent the next decade asking the same question, not whether a human could survive on Venus. They knew the answer to that. They wanted to know exactly how long it would take to kill one. After 18 years of post-mortem analysis on every Venera probe that came before, the answer they reached was 12 seconds. This is what those 12 seconds would actually look like. Pause. Venus is the second planet from the Sun, almost identical in size to Earth, slightly closer to us than Mars at its nearest approach, and frequently the brightest object in the night sky after the Moon. For most of human history, we assumed it was a sister world, a place we might one day walk. Carl Sagan, before he became famous for warning humanity about climate change, wrote his doctoral thesis on Venus. He thought it might be covered in jungles. He was wrong. He was so wrong that the data coming back from the first Venera missions in the mid-1960s made him personally rewrite his thesis. Because Venus is not a sister world. Venus is what happens when a planet decides to kill itself. The surface temperature on Venus is 464 degrees Celsius. That number does not move. It is not hotter at the equator and cooler at the poles. It is not hotter at noon and cooler at night. The entire atmosphere acts as a single thermal mass, and that mass holds heat the way the inside of a sealed oven holds heat after you have cooked in it for 1,000 years. Venus is hot enough to melt lead, hot enough to liquefy zinc, hot enough that aluminum begins to soften before it even touches the ground. Mercury, the planet closest to the Sun, is colder than Venus. Mercury at noon is colder than Venus at midnight. The reason has nothing to do with distance and everything to do with what is now in Venus's atmosphere. The atmosphere of Venus is 96.5% carbon dioxide. The remaining 3.5% is mostly nitrogen, with a thin layer of sulfuric acid clouds suspended about 50 kilometers above the surface. These clouds rain. The droplets fall. But they never reach the ground, because the heat below them is so that the acid evaporates back into vapor before it can complete its descent. The entire planet is wrapped in a closed loop of falling acid that never lands. And the air pressure at the surface, the pressure your body would feel the moment you arrived, is 92 times the pressure of Earth at sea level. That is the equivalent of standing 900 meters underwater. It is the pressure inside a deep-sea trench. It is the pressure that crushes submarines. This is what your body finds itself standing in the moment your suit fails. And every suit fails on Venus, within seconds. Pause. The first second is the easiest one to describe, because most of what happens in the first second happens to your lungs. Your lungs are gas-filled cavities held open by the muscle of your diaphragm and the elastic recoil of the tissue itself. They expect to inflate and deflate against an outside pressure of 1 atmosphere. The instant you arrive on Venus, that outside pressure becomes 92 atmospheres. The air inside your lungs, which a moment ago was at the same pressure as your environment, is now at less than 1/100th of the pressure outside your body. Your lungs do not compress, they invert. The tissue collapses inward against itself, faster than your nervous system can register pain, and the air that was inside them is forced out through your trachea in a single involuntary exhale that your body cannot stop and cannot reverse. In the same second, every other gas-filled cavity in your body fails. Your sinuses, which a moment ago contained a small amount of air at 1 atmosphere, now contain a small amount of air at 1/92nd of its previous volume. And the soft tissue surrounding them rushes in to fill the empty space. Capillaries rupture. Your nose fills with blood. Your eardrums, which separate your middle ear from the outside world, do not pop. They shatter. The pressure differential is so extreme that the membrane does not have time to stretch. It simply fails. And the bones of your inner ear, the smallest bones in the human body, are pushed inward against the soft tissue behind them. Your stomach, your intestines, every pocket of trapped gas inside your digestive system collapses violently. If there was air in your bowels, and there always is, that gas is now compressed to almost nothing, and the surrounding tissue closes around the empty space with enough force to bruise. Internal bleeding begins in the first second. You will not feel any of this yet. The signal has not had time to travel from your nerves to your brain. Pause. The second second is when the heat begins to find you. Up until this point, your suit has been protecting you. Whatever you are wearing, whether it is a modern NASA pressure garment, a Soviet Sokol suit, or a hypothetical future design built specifically for Venus, has an outer layer designed to reflect or absorb thermal radiation. That outer layer is now failing. 464 degrees Celsius is hotter than any temperature a human-rated suit has ever been tested against. The outer fabric does not melt all at once. It begins to char from the outside in, and the charring releases gases that further compromise the structural integrity of the layers beneath. The heat reaches your skin in roughly 2.5 seconds. The first thing it does is something that will sound counterintuitive. It does not burn you. Not yet. Because the air pressure on Venus is so high, water on your skin cannot evaporate the way it does in a normal burn. Evaporation requires the water molecules to escape into the surrounding air. And on Venus, the surrounding air is so densely packed with carbon dioxide molecules that the water has nowhere to go. Your sweat does not vaporize. Your tears do not vaporize. Your blood, when it reaches the surface, will not vaporize either. Instead, the water in your skin begins to superheat. It reaches 100 degrees Celsius, then 150, then 200, and it stays liquid. The boiling point of water at 92 atmospheres of pressure is approximately 304 degrees Celsius. So, instead of boiling, your tissue cooks from the inside out. By the third second, the outer layer of your skin is no longer behaving like skin. It has become something closer to the surface of a roast that has been left in an oven for hours. The cells have ruptured. The proteins have denatured. The collagen has begun to liquefy. But it has not yet broken open. The pressure of the atmosphere is holding everything in place. Your face has not yet melted. Your hands are still recognizable as hands. The damage is happening inside, where you cannot see it, and where, in any case, you would no longer be conscious to look. Pause. Somewhere in the fourth second, you stop being a person. This is a strange thing to say in a video about what Venus does to a human body, because the body is still standing. The body is still upright. The legs have not yet given way, because the muscles have not yet been heated to the point where they release. But the brain, the part of you that is reading this sentence, the part of you that loves things and remembers things and has a name, is gone by the fourth second. Not because the brain itself has cooked. The brain takes longer to cook than the skin. It is gone because the oxygen in your blood has stopped reaching it. When your lungs collapsed in the first second, the oxygen in your bloodstream began to deplete. Your heart, still beating, still pushing blood through the system, was now circulating an increasingly oxygen-depleted supply. The cells of your brain are the most oxygen-hungry cells in your body. They begin to die at 4 to 6 seconds without oxygen. By the 4th second on Venus, you are no longer there. The body that is standing on the surface is a piece of biological machinery that has not yet finished failing. Pause. Seconds 5 through 8 are when the chemistry takes over. The sulfuric acid in the atmosphere, the same acid that rains and re-evaporates 50 kilometers up, exists at lower concentrations all the way down to the surface. It is in contact with your suit from the moment you arrive. It is in contact with your skin from the moment your suit fails. Sulfuric acid is what chemists call a strong oxidizer. At normal temperatures and pressures, on Earth it will burn through skin in seconds and eat through metal in hours. At 464 degrees Celsius, under 92 atmospheres of pressure, it does both at the same time. Your suit is no longer recognizable by the 6th second. The titanium has not melted, but the polymer layers between the titanium have. Your skin, already cooked, is now being chemically dismantled. The acid penetrates the outer layers and reaches the muscle beneath. It begins breaking down the proteins that hold your fibers together. The structure of your forearm, which a moment ago was still anatomically a forearm, begins to lose definition. Not visibly, not from a distance, but on the cellular level, your tissue is now being unmade. By the 7th second, the carbon dioxide that is everywhere around you has begun to penetrate your tissues directly. Carbon dioxide is small. It moves through cell membranes easily. Under high pressure, it dissolves into your blood the way it dissolves into a sealed bottle of soda, except your blood is not designed to hold that much of it. Your blood becomes acidic in a chemical sense, and the pH drops below the level at which any biological process can function. If your brain was still alive, it would have stopped functioning here. It is not still alive. The 8th second is when the structure of your body begins to give way. Not melt, not collapse. Give way. The connective tissue has been heated, chemically attacked, and pressurized for 7 seconds, and the cumulative damage is now greater than what the structure can hold. Your skin, which was still in place, begins to tear. Not from impact, not from external force, but from the continuous failure of the proteins that have been holding it together. The first openings are at the joints, where the tissue is thinnest and the stress is highest. Your knees, your elbows, the corners of your mouth, where your jaw meets your skull. Pause. By the 9th second, you are no longer recognizable as a body. You are still standing, but the structure has begun to fail in multiple places simultaneously. The pressure that has been holding everything together is now the pressure that is forcing the failure outward. Whatever was inside you, the cooked tissue, the boiled blood, the dissolved bone matrix, begins to be pushed through the openings in your skin. The atmosphere does not allow it to escape into the surrounding air. The pressure differential is now in the other direction, and the tissue is being held in place by 92 atmospheres of carbon dioxide. The 10th second is when the bones begin to behave strangely. Bones are not solid. They are a matrix of calcium and protein, with a hollow interior filled with marrow. The marrow has been cooking for several seconds now. The calcium structure, which was designed to bear weight under 1 Earth gravity at 20 degrees Celsius, is now under 92 atmospheres of pressure at 464 degrees Celsius. It is structurally compromised. The first fractures appear in the smaller bones, the fingers, the bones of the wrist, the ribs, the body, which is still standing, begins to fail in the load-bearing structures. In the 11th second, the legs collapse. The femur, the largest bone in the human body, has been heated to the point where its structural integrity can no longer support the weight above it. The body falls, but it does not fall the way a body falls on Earth. The atmosphere of Venus is so dense that it provides resistance. A body falling through Venus's atmosphere falls the way an object falls underwater. Your body, no longer recognizable, no longer biologically functional, settles toward the ground over a span of roughly 2 seconds. And what reaches the surface is something that will continue to be digested by the planet for centuries. The 12th second is when whatever is left of you stops moving. Pause. The Soviet engineers who built the Venera probes did not know all of this when they started. They were working in the 1960s and 70s, before we had detailed atmospheric models. They built their first landers to survive what they thought Venus would be. The first probe, Venera 3, reached the planet in 1966 and lost contact during descent. The second, Venera 4, made it through the atmosphere but was crushed before reaching the surface. The third, Venera 5, was crushed too. So was Venera 6. By the time Venera 7 was being designed, the engineers had stopped trusting their own pressure estimates. They built it to survive 180 atmospheres, twice what they thought they would actually encounter. Venera 7 landed in 1970. It transmitted for 23 minutes. It was the first object built by humans to land on another planet and report back. Every Venera probe that followed, Venera 8 through Venera 14, was overbuilt. They were tested in pressure chambers that simulated conditions far beyond what Venus actually presented. The Soviet engineers were no longer worried about pressure. They had solved pressure. What they could not solve was heat. Every probe died from heat. The longest surviving lander, Venera 13, transmitted for 127 minutes before its electronics failed. It did not fail because of pressure. It did not fail because of acid. It failed because 464 degrees Celsius is hotter than any electronic component can sustain for more than 2 hours, no matter how well it is insulated, which is the strange truth at the center of this video. The thing that kills you on Venus is not the thing you would expect. Pause. If you ask most people what would be most dangerous about Venus, they will say, the pressure. The pressure that crushes submarines. The pressure that is 92 times Earth's. But the pressure is not what kills you. Pressure is something humans have learned to engineer against. We build submarines that go deeper than Venus's surface pressure. We build pressure suits and habitats and structures that can survive any compressive force the planet could deliver. The Soviets solved pressure in the early 1970s and never had to think about it again. What kills you on Venus is the temperature, and the temperature is not something we have a good way to engineer against. There is no insulation that can keep a human warm enough to function and cool enough to survive at 464 degrees. There is no cooling system small enough to fit in a suit that can dump that much heat that fast. Every human-rated thermal management system ever designed is built to handle a temperature gradient of, at most, 200 degrees. Venus presents a gradient of more than 440. This is why no human has ever stood on Venus. Not because of the pressure, not because of the acid. Because the heat, the unrelenting, uniform, 464-degree heat, makes the question of human visitation a question that does not currently have an answer. The Soviets did not stop sending probes because they ran out of money. Although they did. They stopped sending probes because they had learned everything a probe could teach them. The next step would have been a sample return mission, and a sample return mission requires the lander to survive long enough to lift off again. No one has ever built a machine that could do that. No one currently has a credible plan for how to build one. Pause. There is a postscript to this story. In 1982, Venera 13 recorded sound from the surface of Venus. It is the only audio recording ever made on another planet. The sound is unsettling. It contains low-frequency rumbling, irregular hissing, and what some Soviet engineers privately described as a kind of breathing. It is almost certainly the sound of wind moving across a microphone in a dense atmosphere. Almost certainly. But it has been studied for 40 years, and no one has been able to fully account for the irregularity in the signal. The recording lasted just over a minute. Then the probe died. If a human had been standing next to Venera 13, they would have been dead before the first second of that recording was complete. The probe outlived them by 126 minutes and 58 seconds. NASA has an active mission planned for Venus called Da Vinci, scheduled to enter the atmosphere in the early 2030s. Its primary purpose is not to land. Its primary purpose is to descend through the atmosphere, sampling the air at every layer, looking for chemical signatures that might tell us whether Venus was ever like Earth, whether it ever had oceans, whether it ever had life. Because the runaway greenhouse effect that turned Venus into hell did not happen overnight. It took billions of years. And the conditions that produced it are conditions that, in different forms, exist on Earth right now. If there is a reason to keep studying Venus, this is it. Not because we will ever go there. We will not. But because Venus is the only other rocky world in the solar system that started out the same size as Earth, the same distance from the Sun, made of the same material. And Venus became a place that kills any biological organism in 12 seconds. That happened to Venus. We do not yet know whether something like it could happen to us. Pause. The Soviet engineers had a phrase for what they were doing in the late 1970s. They called it learning the geometry of the kill. They were not trying to keep people alive on Venus. They had given up on that. They were trying to understand exactly what Venus did, and in what order, and over what span of seconds, because they believed that understanding hostile environments at this level of detail was the only way to design vehicles that could survive them. The geometry of the kill on Venus, as they finally mapped it, had 3 stages. Pressure in the first second, heat in seconds 2 through 5, chemistry in seconds 6 through 12. After that, there is no body to keep killing. 12 seconds. That is the answer. That is what the longest surviving probe in human history, sitting on the surface of the second planet from the Sun, would have watched happen if a human had stepped out of an imaginary lander and tried to walk. 12 seconds from the boot touching the ground to whatever is left settling into the rock. If you are watching this, subscribe, because the next video on this channel is about Saturn. Saturn does not kill you in 12 seconds. Saturn kills you in a way that takes longer and is worse, and that almost no one outside of NASA has ever talked about publicly. That video drops next week. In the meantime, comment below with your guess. Which planet in this solar system would kill a human the fastest? The answer is not Venus. It is not Mercury.